November 18th, 2009. My name is Frieda Reitman, and it is my pleasure to interview today Lester Sharlach at his home in Stamford as part of the Oral History Archive of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County. I have been looking forward to this day.
Thank you, Frieda. It's a pleasure to have you here to interview me, and Julie is the cameraman, and we're ready to go.
I think we should start with your family background. Would you tell us a little about your parents, including when they came to Stamford?
Yes, my grandparents came from Poland, and then there was a family member that had the Stanley Tool franchise for the entire Great Britain, and their headquarters was in London. And my grandmother, as I understand, was an orphan, so this uncle took them in as a family. And my grandfather immigrated and also ended up in London, and he was a cabinet maker. He was working on a job, and there was another Jewish man who became friends with, and this man was married, and he said, you know, my sister-in-law is living with us, and I'd like her to meet someone. So it ended up that my grandfather married, and our family name until they immigrated to the United States was Sharlach, S-H-A-R-L-I-S. My dad was born in London, July 19th, 1901. And I have a picture here. This is something that we should put in the archives. This is a picture of my dad when he was born. And he must have been just a couple months old. And this is the gown that he was wearing in that picture.
I haven't seen one of those in a long time.
Well, he was born in 1901. So
I couldn't have seen that one.
My grandfather then immigrated by himself with his brother-in-law, and they ended up in New Rochelle, and they were living on Huguenot Street. My grandfather's now brother-in-law was a stonemason, and he was working, they were building a new high school in New Rochelle. And although my grandfather was a skilled cabinet maker, his brother-in-law got him a job hanging doors in the new high school in New Rochelle. That was probably around 1904, I would assume. And then he made enough money to bring my grandmother and my dad over from London. And they lived in New Rochelle, where my two uncles were born. So my father had two brothers. And I'm an only child, so I don't have any siblings. Subsequently, during my grandfather gave that up, and he opened a store called the $5, $10, and $1 store. So it was like a general store, hardware, and many other items. And a salesman came in one day, this is around 1918 to 1920, and said there's a furniture store for Stamford called Silverman's. And it's S-I-L-B-E-R-M-A-N. And the two sons are being drafted, and Mr. Silverman would like to sell the store. So my grandfather came and made a deal to buy the furniture store, and he moved to Stamford, and the two sons were 4F, so they didn't pass the physical, and the deal was off. So my grandfather was already here, and there was a shoemaker at 1 Atlantic Street that had a very wide store, and he had half of it for rent. So my grandfather started a new and used furniture store on, that's 1 Atlantic Street. And then he subsequently moved to Pacific Street when my youngest uncle, Isidore, came into the business with him. And that store had a tenement above it. And it was all, that area in the early 1900s was really a Jewish enclave. The people who were coming from Eastern Europe lived on Pacific Street, School Street. My grandparents then lived on St. John's Place, Chapel Street. Those streets are no longer in existence. The town center sits on that location. And my, then next door to my grandparents' building was the Connecticut Plate Glass, which was the Sackman family. And glass used to come packaged in wooden crates with Excelsior, which is fine shredded wood to protect it from breaking. Sackmans had gotten a big shipment of glass. They took the glass out and pushed the containers against the back door of my grandfather's building. And somebody went by and dropped a match in it, and that whole building acted as a chimney. And that was the end of the friendship between the Sackmans and the Sharlachs, because they ended up suing the Sackman family. And then that was my other Uncle Phil had a gas station on Guernsey Street where UBS is now. And he convinced my father that this was a good business to go into, and my father had a gas station on Jefferson Street opposite the freight yards. And I remember as a youngster going down there the days when the circus was coming to town, because they would come on the flat cars and then they would have a parade up to Ridgeway, where Ridgeway Shopping Center is now. That is where the parade grounds were. And I think that was till I was about 15 years old, that circus would come every year and be located there. The town, of course, at that time, that was still pretty rural. That was all wooded area up there.
Well, you've already given us a few childhood memories. I don't know if there are others you'd like to share.
Well, I can tell you about my school days. I lived on Lincoln Avenue. My parents bought that when they were married. And there was this Sackman family. Well, one of the daughters was Elsie, and her maiden name was Sackman, but she had a short marriage. Her name was Falcon. She lived in Stamford up till a few years ago. She was in her late 90s, and she called me one day to fix her blinds, which she didn't buy from me, but I did, because she would always give me mango bread that she baked when I would go up there. And she showed me an IOU because I was born during the height of the Depression. My father, at that time, this was before the gas station, had a new furniture store on Main Street opposite Pacific, and he had gone bankrupt. And she showed me an IOU that when I was born, she loaned my father $100 to pay some of the expenses. And Dr. Jacob DeMoyton delivered me, and it was a big barter situation. My father sold ice boxes in the store, and he gave Dr. DeMoyton an ice box in lieu of a payment for my delivery. Then during the Depression, we lived on Lincoln Avenue, which is on the east side of Stamford, and it's just east of the railroad tracks. And I can remember very vividly that my parents moved their bedroom down to the dining room, and I was on the sun porch, moved to that place, and they rented 2 rooms to boarders so that they wouldn't lose the house. And then the other things I remember growing up was about Rogers School, because I went to Rogers School, which was on Lockwood Avenue, from kindergarten through 9th grade. And there were a couple memories that I have of teachers in the second grade. I had Ida Brown, and she later married Abe Hecht, who was a high school history teacher. And he became a very well-known and well-loved person among all the Jewish youth. He used to take us to the ball games in New York. And the other people I remember from school were, believe it or not, my shop teachers, because I was very adept at doing mechanical things. And it was Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Feuerstein. And that year that I graduated, I got the Connecticut State Award for Industrial Arts. So even to this day, I mean, the skills that I learned there, I still put to use in woodworking, and I'll show you some of the items that I've made. I can do plumbing, electrical work, and it's kind of things that I enjoy.
How do you locate your family in the Jewish context?
Well, my grandparents, as I said, lived on St. John's Place, and that was walking distance to a Good Shalom on Grove Street. And my parents, my grandparents, my in-laws, my wife's grandparents, we all belonged to a Good Shalom. So during the High Holy Days, we would all sit together, and it was really, a family get-together. And we belonged for some years after we were married, but I'll get into it later why we left.
Did you ever encounter anti-Semitism in that period?
I would say it was minimal. I can remember maybe one or two incidents, but it was not overt. And the street that I lived on was very mixed. There were a few Jewish families. I was very friendly with a Polish family across the street, an Italian family down the street. It was mixed, and we got along well. There were, we would play together. We would walk to Cummings Park. At that time, it was called Halloween Beach. We would ride our bicycles a lot. We would play outdoors, and the signal was when the street lights went on, it was time to come home. But I really, have good memories, and I'm still friends with some of the people who went to Stanford High School from Rogers. And when we have reunions, they always say, okay, everyone from Rogers stand on this side. And matter of fact, we just had a class picnic because most of us were 80 years old this year. And we had almost 100 people came to the picnic at Cove Island that, had graduated in that class.
What proportion were Jewish? About?
I would say probably, in high school, probably 10%. In grammar school, probably 6 to 8%. Because that time, we were also taking students from Japan. And a lot of the Jewish families, like the Frankels from the clothing store, the Cherniaks from the bank, the Schellers who owned the chemical company, they all got bused to school. Everyone else walked. And they were all Jewish, so that's what really brought up the Jewish count in the lower grades.
Shall we get into your family when you got married, or?
Actually, I started, the Jewish community was very tight-knit at the time. Everyone pretty much knew everyone else. The Jewish Center was right down the street from Stanford High School. And we would go to the Jewish Center, and there were activities going on there. And I think probably met Elaine when she was in 9th grade, because I do remember going to her 9th grade graduation at Burdick School. And I think I'll...
So did you meet your friends mostly through the Jewish Center?
Well, yeah.
Or school, or was it?
Well, it was the same. I mean, because we would walk down to the center after school, And, you know, some of the people like Bob Allswanger, who was living on the same street on Colonial Road as my aunt, I've known him since I'm 5 years old. And then there was Arthur Forrest, Eddie Neuger, Ted Godlin. There was probably Fred Oken. There must have been about a dozen Jewish fellows that I was really close friends with.
And were there non-Jewish people, you friends also? Or
Yes,
was your
yeah,
friendship-
yeah. Matter of fact, there's a couple at the senior men's who, you know, that were still, you know, get together and, you know, reminisce.
You know, I'm just trying to get a feel for the
Yeah.
community since I was not there.
Yes, I would say there were people that I knew from high school that were not Jewish that were still we're friends to this day.
You got married when?
We got married July 1st, 1951, and we were married at the Henry Hudson Hotel in Manhattan.
And did you have children?
Yeah, well, when we were first married, we lived in an apartment over Rovin's Curtain Shop in Greenwich. And we lived there for a couple of years, maybe 2 years. And then when Elaine was pregnant, we moved to 56 Barrett Avenue in Belltown. And Jeffrey was our first child. He was born in 1953. Brian was born in 1955. And Deborah, our daughter, was born in 1961. And we lived at Barrett Avenue for about 25 years. And then we moved to Haviland Road. And during that period of time, I began my career in retailing. I believe it was in 9th grade that there was a school psychologist called Kermit Shulman, and he would give career testing. And after he gave me the results of my test, he said, "It seems that you would like to be in retailing for your career." And when I was working in the as a youngster, before I was 16, a cousin of mine was married to a man, Sam Friedenberg, who had a store on Atlantic Street, just south of the Gas and Electric Company, which is now, I believe, where I-95 is, and it was called Ace Baby Carriage. And I worked there in the juvenile furniture store, and he was very talented, and he would rebuild the wicker baby carriages. He would reupholster them, spray the bodies, and he taught me how to, you know, the skills in doing that, and we would re-tire. There were solid rubber tires, and he taught me how to do that. And I learned a lot, and he used to pay me with a dollar war stamp that I would put in my book to buy a war bond. And sometimes if I was only there a little bit of time, he'd give me a 25-cent one.
But you liked what you were doing.
Yeah, I learned a lot. And then my first career in retailing when I was in high school, I got a part-time job. I think it was at the student shop. And I was there for about 2 days when the owner said to me, "You're never going to make it in retailing." And my next step was the Stanford department store, and that was on the corner of Atlantic and Bell Street. And it was right next to St. John's Church. And I worked there for a couple of years in the men's department for a short period of time. And then I was transferred to the linen and domestics and to housewares. And in the housewares department, we sold oilcloth and window shades. And that's where I learned the window shade business. And then before we were married, we had already been engaged, and Rovins was moving from one store on Atlantic Street, we were opposite the Stanford Theater, to a much larger store next to it, which was Arlene Anchor's. It was a dress shop. And that store was on 2 floors. And I was pretty much in the downstairs where we had window shades, drapery hardware, and we used to sell nurses' uniforms and ladies' house dresses and sheets and dish towels downstairs. And Elaine will tell you more about the store because she had to work in the store as well. While my father-in-law decided when Bloomingdale's opened that he didn't want the competition and he wanted to retire. So we had a salesman, he would tell salesmen that he was looking to sell part of the business because I would be a partner. And a lot of old guys came around that wanted a place to sit around and, you know, watch. And then he said, well, one of the salesmen came in and said, you know, I have an account on Bathgate Avenue, and he has a son about the age of your son-in-law that's looking to go into business. So it ended up that we got together, and his name was Alan Hockman, and we became partners in Rovens in Stanford. And we then had moved the store to the other side of the street in the block that was between Bell Street and the Old Town Hall. And it was the M.A. Free Florist building. It was, Free had the big greenhouse up on West Avenue where Bongiorno's is. And he had his retail flower store on that Atlantic Street site. And it was an old wooden building, and he had demolished the building and put up a concrete block building that we rented. And it was an L shape. It had a narrow frontage and a wide back, and the other part of the front was Al Hutter's sandwich shop. We remained there until urban renewal was actually, the physical destruction or demolition was beginning. And we were getting very nervous and thought that we would have no street traffic. So we began to look for another location, and they had just built this Gateway Shopping Center in Wilton. And we decided that the demographics were good and that would be a good place for us. So we opened a store there. I designed most of the fixtures and the layout, and we had a blacksmith shop on West Main Street, and he actually constructed most of the fixtures for us. We went to Plockton Lumber and we bought the storm windows without glass in them. And we put all our curtain displays on sliding tracks up near the ceiling. So on the perimeter of the store, we had a very nice display of curtains. Then we found that the business in Stanford did not slow down. We were getting busier. We began to do shop at home, where we would do window treatments and draperies, custom-made draperies. In the store, we were selling ready-made draperies. And my partner, Alan Hockman, who had come from Bathgate Avenue, he was very gregarious and a good salesman, and I was the mechanical one. So he would go out and do the selling, and I would go back and do the installation. Because I, at that time, acquired the skills of bending rods to make them fit bay windows or bow windows. No one else in town would know how to do that. And we found that the Stanford store was taking up too much time for one person. So Alan said to me, I have a cousin that's working for an uncle of mine on 138th Street in a curtain shop. And let's see if he wants to move to Stanford and we'll give him a job. So we interviewed him, and he seemed to have the skills that we wanted. And he said, well, I'll come if I can buy in and become a partner. So we said, we'll try it for a year, and then we'll make a decision. Well, it worked out well, so we had a 3-way split partnership.
I'm very impressed that you and your partner worked out so well, not having known from the beginning that it worked so well.
And then we had a single store. Then the tenant next door moved out. It became a double store, and subsequently it became a triple store.
And Mr. Rovin
Mr. Rovin had retired. He retired before we did any of this expansion. He retired, he was about 55, 56 years old. And he was a great athlete. Elaine will tell you more about him. And he was still playing ball when he retired and golfing. We then, so now we had 3 partners and 2 stores. And then we had, we were very cooperative with our competitors. If they were buying from the same vendor and we needed 6 pair of curtains and we only had 4, we would call Bridgeport, Skydell's, or there was a place in Norwalk or a place in Portchester, and we would, either swap goods or paint. And then one day this fellow from Greenwich called and he said, I have a store in Greenwich, I think it's too much for me, I'd like to sell it. So we said, yeah, Greenwich sounds like a great place to have a store. So we went down and looked at it, and he said, I have to sell it quickly. And we began to become suspicious. We found out, in doing an investigation, that he had gotten a loan from the SBA, the Small Business Administration, to open that store. And he took the money and bought 2 racehorses. So he was down at the track most of the time, watching his horses. Well, we said, yes, we spoke to our attorney. He said, buy the store and the fixtures, but don't buy a piece of merchandise because it's probably not paid for. So it ended up, we bought that store, and the SBA were there, and as soon as we gave them the check, they held it while he endorsed it, and they walked out with the money that they could get. We closed the store for about 2 weeks, painted it, inventoried it, and we were there for probably 15 years when Richards, the men's shop, was right next door to us, and he bought the old A&P down the street. And so we took the second store, so we enlarged that store. And we did very well, and probably when the lease was up, which was probably another 8 years, the landlord sent us a letter to leave the store broom clean at the end of our lease. Well, I called the landlord and said, well, we'd like to stay, we're doing well. He said, well, you're paying $2,500 a month for the store, and the new rent is $10,000 a month. The Gap has already leased it. So we said at $10,000, that's the goodbye. So that was the end of our Greenwich location. In the meantime, there were 3 of us that were partners, the same as in Wilton. The salesman came in and said, there's the curtain shop in Westport. The owner, Mr. Ginsberg, is not well. He has to go for an operation. And maybe you talk to him, he'll sell you the business. So he had a hernia operation. We called him a month later. And he said, I can't talk, I'm still suffering from the anesthesia. This went on for about 3 months, that he was using that for an excuse. And then we spoke to him, and this was a freestanding building that looked like a barn on the corner of Turkey Hill Road and Post Road in Westport. And we finally met with him, and he decided that, yes, he would sell us the store. And then we went back and said, well, how about selling us the real estate as well? So it ended up that we had a 4th location, and then my brother-in-law, Elaine's brother Fred, came in with us because he had gotten out of college with a degree in actuarial science, and there were no jobs in that field any longer because computers can do that project in seconds rather than weeks. So Fred became a partner in the Westport store. And we hired a man with a van. Twice a week he would go to all 4 stores, balancing inventories for special orders. So if you came in and you wanted 5 pair of draperies, and we only had 3, but we had 1 in Westport and 1 in Wilton, we would pick up and trade. And our inventory control was manual. So we had a bookkeeper She would go through the sales tickets, and every item in the store had a insert in the loose leaf book, an inventory control book, and she would have to erase what was sold.
So each store was independent? In other words, this was not one company with 4 stores?
We had, Stanford was Rovens Inc., we had Rovens of Wilton Inc., Rovens of Greenwich Inc., and Rovens of Westport Inc. They were
Okay.
independent. So during the Stanford operation, I had a call from a family friend and said, would you be interested in being a director on a local bank we want to open? And I said, well, sounds interesting, let me know more about it. Well, it turns out that there were a group of men who lived in Stanford, but were commuters. They all had jobs in New York. One was a banker, one was an attorney, and so on. And they applied for a state charter, and they were denied the charter because they didn't have any local businessmen on the board. So you get they vet you pretty thoroughly. And I became a board member of the Liberty National Bank, and that was on Bank Street. And it was very interesting to be on the other side of the table to find out that everybody didn't pay the same interest rate, and people that they knew didn't even have to fill out any papers. I know them well. The floor manager would come up and say, so-and-so wants to build a house, he needs so many dollars to get started. Well, let's see the paperwork. Oh no, he comes from a good family, don't worry about him, just give him the money. And so this would happen several times, and we didn't get stuck. And one day he said, would you ask him to come to a meeting? And he came up, and we said to him, tell us, how is it that you're the low bidder on so many jobs? He says, don't worry, everybody wants extras.
Okay, you understood that.
Yeah, so as soon as you have a change order, that's where he made out.
You didn't put your military service in this.
My military service, well, let me continue with the bank,
Okay.
and we'll go back to that. Then Connecticut National Bank rented space in Landmark Square to open a bank. And they had it all fitted out, ready to open. They did not realize that there was a banking law that said if a local bank, a home bank, is situated in that community, you cannot open a branch if your headquarters is elsewhere. So Norm Reeder and Liberty National Bank were the two small banks. So Norm said, I don't want to get involved, but I will financially. Let's fight the case. So we did, and they had no choice, CNB, but to buy us out. So they bought out the Liberty National Bank and closed it so they could open this fancy bank in the Landmark Square. Then the officers of the bank, the president was Dick Sontag, and a banking charter was a license to steal, really, I found out. And he said, let's open a bank in Greenwich, and we'll open it in my wife's name. So we applied for the charter. Most of us were the same members of the board, and they called it Connecticut Women's Bank. And they said, well, there's a lot of rich women in Greenwich. This name is going to go over really big. Well, it didn't happen. So after a year, we changed it to the Greenwich Community Bank. And then I think the bank was sold to the Patriot Bank, I believe, bought it. And so that was my end of my banking career. But I learned a lot about how banks operate from the other side of the table. And military service, I joined the Naval Reserve, which had the facility on McGee Avenue. And I was trained there to be a radar man. And I went you had to do 2 weeks of training every year. And I went out to sea a few times. One of the interesting things that is memorable, the first time I went down we went across down south, across Kiptopeke Bay, and that was the first encounter I had where it was blacks only on certain sides of the ferry and the washrooms. And I was a third-class radar man, and when I got on the ship, they said, we don't need radar man, we need a cook. And it was a destroyer, and it was pretty rough. At that time, the uniforms had 13 buttons, 6 going up the side, 7 going across. By the time I came back to New York and running through Grand Central Station with my duffel bag, I had to hold up my pants with one hand because I had lost so much weight. But we went to Cuba, to San Diego. I remember that.
What year was that?
Probably was it was during the Korean War, because people on each side of me were put in, directed into full-time service, and for some reason I just never was. I think it must have been in the late 40s, because I remember bringing Elaine back an alligator pocketbook from Cuba.
Okay.
Then I was at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I was an instructor. We became meteorologists. We were telling the recruits how to tell when it was going to rain. But I actually never really had what they would term active duty. It was all reservists.
Okay. I wonder, how did you feel about living in Stamford and having a family business in Stamford?
It was very rewarding. I mean, because people would come in, you would know their families, they would buy these bridal sets for their daughters, which was a white satin bedspread with white satin pillowcases, and it came with white satin scarves for the dresser. It was called a bridal set. And we didn't have charge accounts until much later in my career. We would have layaway plan. Mm-hmm. And Stamford was a blue collar town. The majority of our customers worked at Allentown or Pitney Bowes or Excelsior Hardware. And they would usually get paid in cash on Fridays. They would walk from work up Atlantic Street, and we would, they would have 2 or 3 packages, and we had, again, a manual system. They would put $2 on this one and $3 on that one, and when it was paid for, they would take it home, so they didn't get in, over their heads in debt. And it wasn't until much later in my retailing career that we began to have credit cards.
Okay, until you had the card, you didn't give credit, right, until the cards came in.
Well, that's how I got in the habit of reading the obituaries, which I still do every day, because you wanted to see who died that owed you money. So the other interesting thing, while we were in business on Atlantic Street, we decided we wanted a bigger store and we wanted a better location. And one day, Paul Beaudry came in the store and said, I was just at lunch with Sam Pearson, and they have a store on the corner of Broad and Atlantic that Salati's drugstore is in. And Salati is moving across the street. That store is going to be for rent. So we said, that sounds great. Let's go look at it. And we decided this was perfect. It was on a corner of Broad and Summer, and Summer Street is very narrow there. And anyone coming down the street, you see that storefront. So we went and spoke to Sam Pearson, who was his family owned that business. And he was the greatest landlord anyone could wish for. We said, Sam, that the store is a great location. We wish it were bigger. He said, well, we have the real estate company upstairs and the insurance company downstairs. He said, the insurance company really could be upstairs too. So he said, I'll tell you, we'll move upstairs and you can have both stores. So we ended up with a store that I'll show you the picture of later. And corner of Broad and Atlantic. And several years later, we had a very good relationship. And several years later, Sam was diagnosed with lung cancer. And he called us upstairs and he said, would you fellas like to buy my share of the building, which is 55%, and then I have aunts and cousins, and I'm sure once you have the majority that they'll sell you their shares. So we jumped at the opportunity and we bought the building, which was a very smart move on our part, become our own landlords. And then we had, when Bloomingdale's opened and we were between Macy's and Bloomingdale's, we had enjoyed the foot traffic. We didn't have to advertise. People just walking from one store to the other, the exposure we had, and we had attractive windows that people would come in and shop.
Who did the windows?
Usually I did them, so some help from my partners. And then when we designed the other stores, we created them so they didn't need windows. You would just look right into the store itself, became the window. Shortly after we moved into Atlantic Street, there was a car speeding down south on Summer, and it crashed right into this car ended into the front of our store. So that got us some good publicity.
Nobody was hurt, I assume.
No, it careened off a police car and ended up into our, smashed the front of our store. It was also we had owned the store in Westport, the building, and the real estate men came down from Pearson and Smith, and they said, we have a group of executives who just pooled some money and they want to buy some real estate. You'd be interested in selling. And we said, well, I guess if the price is right, we'll sell. We had just decided to close Stanford because my immediate partner, his father-in-law died, he inherited some money, and he didn't care about working anymore. And in Westport, my brother-in-law was running it, and he was recently divorced, and he wasn't spending as much time as my partners thought he should. So we ended up that we would sell Westport, and we rented Stanford to the Circuit City stores. They were opening small stores at the time. So they took over in January of 1985, because we closed that store December 31st, 1984. We gave them 3 months concession to get fitted. They didn't do a thing till about August, and then they brought teams in to work around the clock. They opened for Thanksgiving so they'd be ready for the Christmas business. And they had stores in Manhattan and throughout this area. They were headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. In March, they made a corporate decision to close all the locations in the Northeast. This was before they became a big box retailer. They had a 10-year lease. They paid rent. They paid their rent without question. They even paid for garbage removal for 10 years without being there. And that saved us, because then when the mall opened, the downtown, virtually the people were wiped off foot traffic.
So you mean the business would not have succeeded at that point? Your business would probably not have been...
I don't think it would have, because our partner in Wilton, Alan Beckman, he was doing quite well in this triple store. And he had very good taste in what merchandise to put in.
Oh, I had asked you whether you would have continued what you...
Oh, okay. I was about our partner in Wilton.
Go ahead.
We had now at this point we had closed Wilton. Excuse me. We had closed Westport. We had closed Stanford. Now what we did, we brought all our inventory from Stanford up to Westport because we had on-site parking And as I recall, we put a tent up in the parking lot and had, you know, the closeout sale. And then my partner, Alan Hockman, ran the Greenwich store through the end of the lease. And I went there maybe once a week to troubleshoot the installations or anything that, you know, he wanted to ask me about. And the end of the lease, we closed that store. And Alan Beckman was left with the Wilton store. We had what's called buy-sell agreements for each individual corporation. So in the event one of us wanted to retire or something, other reason, we would set a value on the business every year and insure it with life insurance. So Alan Beckman at the time decided that he didn't want us for partners anymore, he would buy us out, which he did. And subsequently, he did not do well, he had to downsize, and eventually he had to close. He went Chapter 7, which was unfortunate. So that was the end of Rovens. You know, we became really the place to shop for curtains or draperies in Lower Fairfield County. And we didn't call ourselves Rovens Curtain Shop any longer. It was Rovens Fine Fashion for the Home. That was the way we advertised. We do windows.
Oh, quite a life. Do you want to talk about your children, or do you want to go to
I think
community?
Elaine will do that.
Elaine will talk
Yeah.
about the children.
I can talk and show you some of the other things. This is my picture when I came back from Pritikin, and that was the picture that was taken for the advertisements for the Liberty National Bank when they were advertising who their directors were. And what had happened, I was in 1979, I was having chest pains, and they went into Stanford Hospital for an angiogram, and the cardiologist said, you need a bypass immediately. And this was brought over to my internist, David Woodrow, and he said, not so quick. And he sent me out to Pritikin. And Elaine and I were there for a month. And I lost weight, began to exercise, watched my diet pretty critically. And I was doing well, but when I came back, I had lost so much weight that people would say, are you well? What's wrong, you know? So that's when I sported the mustache and the beard. So it hid the wrinkles. And I had it for quite a couple of years. And one day I shaved it off, and it took 3 days before our children noticed that I looked different. So it was until December 2006, I found when the elevator wasn't working at the archives and I had to walk up 5 flights of stairs, I didn't feel quite right. And I exercised in the basement, where I have a treadmill and a cross trainer and a bike. And if it's nice out, I walk, and there's a gentle hill out here and I found I was having some discomfort. So I went to the cardiologist, and he said, yes, we better look into this. I'll send you to Columbia Presbyterian for a stent. We'll see what. They took the first picture, and they said, you need a bypass. So I had a bypass in December of 2006, and I'm doing really well. It was really a difficult situation. When I got home, I was in congestive heart failure after 2 days, and then I was in Stanford Hospital. But I just saw my cardiologist this morning, and he said, you're doing great. Stick to what you're doing. As far as my Jewish background, I went to Hebrew school, which was upstairs at the Jewish Center. We used to go after school. It was the Hebrew school. And I remember Mr. Totis was the principal, and I was bar mitzvahed at Aguda Sholem on Grove Street. And I can remember when we would go down for the High Holy Days. This was before the back of the shul was developed. And during Yom Kippur, we would go what we would call the Jewish mountains and climb the rocks in the back. Or we would walk to the corner of Main and St. John's Place where the Coca-Cola bottling plant was. And you would watch the glass bottles being filled with Coca-Cola. And then at the afternoon, you'd go to the Park Row restaurant, which was run by the Cocolases. And that was the place where you would see all the non-religious Jews.
And your children went to Hebrew school here?
Yes, our boys were both bar mitzvah to go to Sholem. Jeffrey and Brian both went to Hebrew school. And at that time, the girls weren't being bar mitzvah. Deborah was not bar mitzvah. She has two boys who were both bar mitzvah.
At Aguda Shalom?
No, she lives in Fairfield. They were, the youngest one is 13. His bar mitzvah was in April of 2006. And they belong to a Reform synagogue, B'nai Israel on Park Avenue in Bridgeport. And actually, that's where we go now for the High Holy Days.
Have you been involved in, besides having this business that obviously you grew and enjoyed, were you involved in the community and other things?
Yes, when the boys were younger, I was active in the Boy Scouts, the Cub Scouts. Well, I was always active with my high school class reunions. And pretty much, I was active in the downtown Chamber of Commerce on the Stanford Special Services with Sandra Goldstein. That's it. It was a pretty busy time between running the stores and having, 3 partners is like having an extra 3 wives.
Are there many people in the community you've known all your life?
That are still around? Yes. There are many. I would say at least a few dozen that, for example, we interviewed Gloria Lotstein, and Gloria and I walked together in the graduation procession at high school, because she at that time was going with Ralph and I was already going with Elaine. So we've known each other a long time. A few of the fellows at Senior Men's, Tom Kinsella, Bob Gaipa, Earl King, we all graduated together. Bob Allslinger, we graduated, all in class of 47.
Do you have any reflections that you would like to contribute?
Well, I have more to talk about.
You have more to talk about, okay.
I should have.
Almost
Well,
in the way, people related to each other and everything, and then it became so big.
Well, are you on? Well, getting back to the Jewish community, when my parents moved here, the entire Jewish enclave was centered around Pacific Street, School Street, Brook Street, and then when you made it, you moved to Lafayette Street. And beyond that, the real rich ones moved to Strawberry Hill. And it was my generation that lived, mostly on Lafayette Street and Strawberry Hill, because the Jews, the children became better educated, they became professional people, or they went into business. The downtown, Atlantic Street, Main Street, were all family businesses. I would say at least 60% of them were Jewish family-owned businesses. And I can go down the street and name them for you. There was Ruby Fine, who had B. Fine and Son shoe stores, where my parents used to take me to buy shoes. And you would put the shoes on and put your feet in the x-ray machine to see if they fit correctly. And there were two Levinson brothers. They both had men's haberdasheries. Lou Consipor, also men's store. Levine had had a men's haberdashery store down where the Thruway is now on Atlantic Street. Stanley Mackenberg's parents had a cigar store next to them. The Stanford Shopper, that was Harry Rosenbaum and Sid Karp, they were on Atlantic Street. Then there was Caden's Florist, the Red Cross Pharmacy, they were all Jewish. We had a competitor, Manchester Silk Shop, Modry was his name. In our block there was Sarner's, that was a small department store. Weinkraut was a Daisy Kitty shop, and there was National Dinette across the street. I remember his name was Stanley, I don't remember his last name. And then on Main Street, the Queskins had a fireplace shop. Schulman's had an appliance store. Richards at that time had an Army-Navy store opposite the Plaza Theater. And then there was the French shop that was owned by Jewish people. Don Henry was Jewish. Sherby Cow had a cigar store, Sherby's, on Bedford Street. There was several jewelry stores. There was Siegelbaum's was a ladies' shop. There was, oh gosh, it just, those are the ones I can remember. Right? Pacific Street is a whole other one. Right?
And did everybody belong to a shul, or was there a large secular?
I think that more people belonged to shul then. And then the temple was built, and that was next to the Jewish Center. And I think either, you know, if you had money, you belonged to the temple, and if you were just average people, you belonged to the shul. That's pretty much the way it seemed to me. I remember when I belonged to the Boy Scouts, when I was a Boy Scout, we used to meet at Temple Bethel. And this Dr. Friedman, who was a podiatrist, was a scoutmaster. Troop 15 still exists.
Okay, that's good to have on the record.
Yeah, and you know, the Jewish boys who were my age, we all, you know, stuck together. We'd go to dances together. We would always hang out at the center. We had there were two factions of the club of the boys. One was the group of B'nai Zion, which was like the BBG girls, but it was the boys section. And the ones who I belonged to, we would meet in the library of the old Jewish Center. And we were organizing and we needed a name. Well, on the wall was a stuffed head of a buck deer. So we said, well, let's call ourselves the Antler Club. So the Antler Club was Arthur Forrest, Fred Oken, Eddie Neuger, Teddy Godlin, Jerry Klein, myself. And, you know, we kind of stuck together. Bob Olswanger was the only one with a car. His father had a gas station. And it was an old Ford with a rumble seat. So that was our fun time to go sit in the rumble seat. One of the great things that I would like to mention was one summer when I was in the Stanford store and Alan Hockman and I were running it. And I said to Alan, Jeffrey's going to be 16, and I think this is the last opportunity we'll have to take a family vacation together. So how about I'll take off this summer and you can take off next summer. So he agreed to that. And we had grown up in our travels, we had gone to the Danbury Fair. We went with our family to the Danbury Fair, and at the fair they had a display of travel trailers. And we became enthralled with travel trailers, and especially our son Jeffrey, who was a very persuasive person, still is. He said, you know, why don't we get a travel trailer and we can go do things. So
This is for this summer that you're
Yeah.
taking off?
So we first started out with a tent trailer, which is this one here, that folds up and you tow it behind your car. So we did a lot of small trips with that. But then we decided if I could have this summer off, we would go across country. So we bought a travel trailer. And I was doing an installation of window blinds for an executive at the Ford Motor Company. And I told him we were going to buy a Ford station wagon to pull this trailer we had ordered. So he said, I can get you that. He said, we have some that we just use for the salesman, you know, for us to use, and they use a few thousand miles. So I bought this Ford station wagon, and we towed this cross country. Jeffrey was 16, and we had this inside the door of the many places that we visited. We went to the national parks. We got as far as California. We went over to Tijuana. And as Jeffrey says, when people ask if he's done any traveling, he tells them all the places he had been, but not how he got there. So that was a very...
Was it difficult traveling that way?
No. We had bunk beds in the back, and the dining room table went down and became a double bed. And it was an exciting trip. It was very memorable. I mean, the kids remember it to this day. And we thought Deborah, who was about 4 at the time, we thought she slept through the whole thing. And when we got back, they had show and tell at Newfield School, and I think she was probably in the 4th grade. And she was telling the class all about her experiences. And the next day I had to bring the trailer to school so the kids could walk. So that was an exciting time to be able to take 8 weeks off. When we came back, we went up through Canada and then came back down. We did, then from there we graduated to a small motorhome, which was this one. And we did a lot of traveling in that motorhome. And then after the kids were in college and out of the house, we bought this large motorhome, which belonged to a family up in North Stamford, and they wanted to sell it. I heard about it. That's what it looked like. And then we had it repainted to look a little more classy because the paint was faded. And we did a lot of traveling in that. We went to Florida several times, we went to Canada, and we towed a small car behind that. So,
And you always slept in that?
oh, that was fitted out very nicely inside. It had a refrigerator, a stove, a microwave, double bed. You know, it was very comfortable traveling. At that time, you know, gas was still 35, 40 cents a gallon, because you get about 8-10 miles to a gallon on that. And then, since I've retired, we've done several cruises. So those are ships. Do you have anything? I guess one of my hobbies is woodworking. I have a lot of things that I built for the grandchildren, outdoor, you know, swing sets, and I can show you a few things that I still have brought back home because they were not being used anymore. I still enjoy doing woodworking, and I can do a little bit of everything with, enjoy doing that.
Yeah, I'm looking to see what you put down. I think that you wanted to show us 2 woodworking projects.
Yeah, I think before we go into that, while we're in business, one of my largest and most memorable jobs was the Pickwick Arms Hotel. There was this gentleman that owned Petro, the Petroleum Heat and Power Company, and his name was McCart. And he had just had this big cabin cruiser built. And he said when he pulled into a berth, everyone was peeking in the windows. And his secretary called me up and said, is there something you can figure out where I can see out and people can't see in? Well, we were selling these Mylar shades for storefronts that were amber in color. Well, they had just come out with one that was silver in color. So as long as it was lighter outside than it was inside, you couldn't see through it. I mean, you could see out, but people couldn't see in. So I brought him a sample, and he said, that's great, but what are you going to do for brackets? Because I can't have anything that was corrode. So I bought a piece of plexiglass, and I was able to figure out, I said, we can put these in with stainless steel screws. He was so pleased. Secretary called me one day, and she said, Mr. McCart just bought the Pickwick Arms Hotel. He told me to call you and see whatever you had that he could buy, he wants it. So that ended up being the biggest single job that Rovins ever had. We did every window treatment, we did radiator covers, we did bedspreads, we did window screens, and it was just from being able to solve a problem. And now the Pickwick Arms was demolished, and now it's an office complex. It was on the top of Greenwich Avenue and Putnam Avenue. It was an English Tudor hotel. So that was an interesting part of my career. I retired in December of 1984 is when we closed our store. I've been very active in PFLAG, which is the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and now it includes transgenders and bisexuals. So I've been active in that for, oh gosh, it's close to at least 25 years. And it's a support group for parents of gays. Our oldest son, Jeffrey, is gay. And it has been very rewarding. I think it's been a very rewarding experience for both of us. You become very tolerant of people of all sizes and colors and natures and abilities and disabilities. And people come up to us after a meeting and they'll tell us how appreciative they are that they've been going for professional help and are getting more out of talking to people who are in the same situations. At one time, we had as many as 50 people coming to a meeting. A third of them were gay people who were afraid to come out to their parents. We became their pseudo-family. And the others were parents who were really, having a terrible time dealing with it. Today, we're down maybe to 8 or 10 people, and usually 1 or 2 people who are new, who have called or found us on the internet. But there's still a need, but we're doing more outreach now, going to the schools, and there are now, most schools have a gay alliance, and kids coming out now in junior high school and in high school, where before they wouldn't come out. Our son didn't come out until after he finished college because he was afraid we would, not continue to pay for his education. But we're a very close family now. I mean, he's, all our kids are great, but it has not been a problem with us. He's been very successful in his career. He's very considerate of us. He probably calls us more to see how things are than our kids that live right nearby. So.
I usually ask people about what. That's your high school graduation picture. Is that you?
Yeah. I
Good
don't know.
Lord,
I don't know if I was 16 or 18. Because Elaine had the birthday party for me, but the kids just had this enlarged.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if when it's on, is it also recording?
Yeah, that's recording.
You want
The
something
Rovens.
to drink? You want a drink of water or seltzer or soda?
I'm fine.
So am I.
Okay. Now he probably needs to drink something. He didn't stop talking.
About that.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, I think this was my 18th birthday. And that was at Elaine Roven's house at 592 Newfield Avenue in Stamford. I think I must have been 18. And I think this was our engagement picture.
Good looking couple.
Just move a little bit more this way. Okay.
This is, we can do this one. This is the Stanford Advocate, and dated December 29th, 1984. And this is when we closed Roven's Curtain Shop in Stamford, Connecticut. And it says, "Curtain Shop makes way for high tech," because we had rented the store to Circuit City.
Right.
And this is my partner, Alan Hockman. And that's me, Lester Sharlach. And this was on the corner of Summer and Broad Street in Stamford. Roven's, fine fashion for the home. My father-in-law started the business in 1932. He was manager of a curtain shop called Ruby Lane. And they closed the Stanford store. The landlord felt sorry for him because Elaine had just been born. And he said, "I have a space on Atlantic Street, which was an abandoned stairwell." And my father-in-law told the story that if he stretched his arms out, he could touch both walls of the store. And he borrowed $500 from his family and friends, went down to the Lower East Side and bought enough merchandise to start the business. So today,
Well, knowing stories of business people, your story is one of amazing opportunity and success. I wonder if you have written about it. Is this your only?
this is it.
Because I think it is of interest to people who follow these things. It is so different from the business environment we think about today. That might still exist in pieces, but we don't think about it
Exactly, yeah.
as the business environment.
Actually, when I think about it, our oldest son Jeffrey had done an oral interview a few years ago in his office in Miami Beach, and I had to review it and see what depth we went into.
Otherwise, I think I would say thank you for a wonderful interview, and unless you have something more, we should end here so that that Elaine is still to come.
Yes, I agree, and I thank you, and I look forward to viewing the video and sharing it with our family.